The moment my father-in-law slid the manila folder across the dining table toward me, the entire room went silent. Not the comfortable quiet of a family gathered for Thanksgiving, but the other kind, the kind that settles on your chest like a weight. I looked at my husband. He was staring at his wine glass. I opened the folder. Divorce papers. Notarized. Already dated. I could say that I yelled, or stood up and threw the folder across the room, or delivered a sharp sentence that left everyone stunned. But I didn't. I remained seated at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by his family and the people I had believed were my family too. I read every line slowly and carefully, the way my mother taught me to review anything important before signing it. When I finished, I looked at my husband again. This time he met my eyes for 2 seconds before looking away. I picked up the pen his father had placed beside the folder and signed. What none of them knew, no one in that room except my best friend Sophie, sitting 3 chairs down with her hands folded in her lap and a small brown envelope tucked inside her jacket, was that I had already made my own preparations. I had known for 11 days that the folder my father-in-law believed was the end of my story was actually the final page of someone else's. But to understand why that Thanksgiving dinner changed everything, you need to know what the Hargroves were like from the beginning. I met Daniel Hargrove at a mutual friend's birthday party in downtown Chicago when I was 28. He was funny and warm, and he called his mother every Sunday, which I found charming at the time. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. When he brought me to meet his parents for the first time at their home in Naperville, a large brick colonial with a circular driveway and a garden that looked as if it employed 3 people full-time, I told myself the slight chill in his mother Gloria's handshake was simply nerves. Mason Hargrove's habit of talking over me at dinner, I decided, was just how older men from his generation communicated. And the framed photos of Daniel's college girlfriend, Vanessa, still displayed in the hallway of his childhood home, were probably just an oversight. I was 30 when we married, a certified public accountant with my own clients, my own lease, and my own retirement account. I wasn't naive. I just wanted to believe that love was enough to build something stable. The first time Gloria asked about children, we had been married 4 months. We were sitting in her sunroom after Easter dinner when she set down her teacup and said pleasantly, "So when can we expect some good news?" I told her we were enjoying being newlyweds and would start trying when the time felt right. She smiled and said, "Of course," then added, "Daniel's father had his first son at 26. The Hargrove men tend to want families young." I let it go. By our first anniversary, the questions had become constant. Holidays, Sunday dinners, even random Wednesday phone calls that Daniel passed to me halfway through with a look that said, "Please handle this." Gloria would mention a neighbor's new grandchild. Mason would talk about legacy and continuing what the family had built. Daniel would sit beside me saying nothing. Later in the car, he would squeeze my hand and say, "You know how they are. They don't mean anything by it." But they did mean something by it. That was the part Daniel never quite understood, or perhaps never wanted to. 14 months into our marriage, my gynecologist told me I had polycystic ovary syndrome. It wasn't severe and it was manageable, but it meant conceiving might take longer than usual and would require monitoring, possibly medication. I cried in my car for 20 minutes, called my mother, and then went home and told Daniel everything. He held me that night and said all the right things. He said it didn't matter, that we would figure it out together, that he loved me, not a schedule. I believed him. What I should have paid attention to was the phone call he made to his father the following week. I didn't hear all of it. I was in the kitchen while his voice dropped low in the living room. By the time I walked in, he had changed the subject, but I heard one sentence before he did. "I don't know yet, Dad. I just don't know." I stored that away somewhere I preferred not to examine. The second year of our marriage felt like slow erosion. Mason began calling Daniel directly to arrange family dinners I wasn't specifically invited to. Gloria started forwarding articles about fertility-supporting lifestyle choices to my email with no comment, just a link and no subject line. One night at dinner, Mason said in front of 6 relatives that he hoped Daniel would make a decision before it was too late. When I asked what he meant, he looked at me with something close to pity and said, "I mean about your future, Rachel, as a family." Daniel responded only with, "Dad, come on," which was the most he ever said in my defense. During that time, I had two strong supports. My mother, Linda, who drove up from Indianapolis every other month to take me to lunch and listen without giving advice unless I asked for it. And Sophie, my college roommate, who worked as a family law paralegal and who, during many long phone calls, had quietly started explaining things I told myself I didn't need to know. "I'm just keeping you informed," she would say. "Information doesn't commit you to anything." I told her she was being dramatic. She replied, "Maybe, but you should know Illinois is an equitable distribution state. You should know the house you bought together is in both your names, and you should know that if Daniel ever—" "Sophie, I know," I interrupted. "Just let me finish." So I let her finish. I listened, then filed everything in the same mental place as that half-heard phone call. The Thanksgiving dinner was Mason's idea. He called it a family celebration and told Daniel it was an opportunity to bring everyone together. 22 people attended. Hargrove cousins, Daniel's brother and his wife, Mason's business partner and his wife, and several longtime family friends. Mason had reserved the private dining room at his club, a wood-paneled space with oil portraits on the walls, and a coat check attendant who greeted everyone by name. I wore a navy dress and my grandmother's pearl earrings. I brought a bottle of wine that cost more than it should have. I smiled when we arrived. Sophie was there because she had been dating Daniel's cousin Marcus for several months. During cocktail hour, she sat beside me and didn't say much, but at one point she leaned close and asked, "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," I said. "Good," she replied. "Stay fine. Whatever happens tonight, stay fine." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Just stay fine, Rachel." Before I could ask more, Gloria appeared at my side in a champagne-colored blazer, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You look lovely. Come say hello to Mason's partner, Harold. He's been asking about Daniel." I followed her, lost Sophie in the crowd, and spent the next 40 minutes making polite conversation about commercial real estate, the Chicago Bears season, and whether the club's chef had changed the stuffing recipe. I told myself Sophie was being dramatic again. She worked in family law. She saw the worst situations every day. It shaped how she viewed things. Dinner began at 7. Mason sat at the head of the table. I was seated 3 chairs to his left beside Daniel, who seemed quieter than usual in a way I had learned not to question. The first 2 courses passed normally. Turkey, sweet potatoes, green beans with almonds. The cousins debated football. Gloria refilled glasses before anyone asked. Then the plates were cleared, and before dessert, Mason stood up and tapped his glass. "I'd like to say a few words," he said, "about family." The speech felt unusually formal. He spoke about legacy, about what the Hargrove name had taken generations to build, and about the responsibility each generation carried to move that legacy forward. His gaze moved around the table, briefly touching each face. When it reached mine, it stayed a moment too long. "Sometimes," he said, "we have to make difficult decisions, not because we want to, but because love for the people we've built something with requires honesty, even when honesty is difficult." He reached beneath his chair, placed a manila folder on the table, and slid it toward me. "Daniel and I have discussed this at length," he said. "This is the right decision for everyone." The table became extremely quiet. Not surprised quiet, waiting quiet. The kind that meant most of the room already knew. I looked at Daniel. He was still staring at his wine glass. I opened the folder and took my time reading every page. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My grandmother's pearls felt cool against my neck. Somewhere down the table, someone shifted in their chair. When I finished, I placed the folder flat on the table. "The terms are more than generous," Mason said. "Rachel, the house, a settlement, 6 months of—" "I know what the terms say," I replied. "I just read them." He nodded with the satisfaction of a man who had rarely been told no by anyone important to him. Daniel still hadn't looked at me. "There's one more thing," Gloria said carefully, her voice rehearsed. She stood and moved to the arched entrance of the dining room, gesturing to someone waiting outside. A woman walked in. She looked about 26 or 27, with dark hair, a green dress, and expensive shoes. She smiled at the room with the calm confidence of someone coached on exactly how to behave there. She walked to Daniel's side of the table and leaned down to whisper in his ear. As she did, the pearl earrings she wore caught the light. I recognized them immediately. They were Gloria's, the pair she had once shown me in her jewelry box 18 months earlier, explaining that they had belonged to Hargrove women for 3 generations and that she couldn't wait to pass them down. She had passed them down, just not to me. "This is Vanessa," Mason said. "Daniel and Vanessa have known each other a long time. She's a wonderful woman." "She doesn't need an introduction," I said calmly. He blinked. I picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers. Every page, every line that required my name. I took my time with each one. The room remained so quiet that I could hear the coat check attendant's muffled radio playing something jazzy down the hallway. When I finished, I closed the folder and placed it back in front of Mason. Then I looked at Daniel one last time. "You could have just talked to me," I said. "That's all I ever needed, for you to talk to me." He didn't respond. I hadn't expected him to, but I needed to say it so that I would always know I had. I folded my napkin and pushed back my chair. That was when Sophie stood up. She had been so quiet throughout the entire event that most people had probably forgotten she was there. She was seated 3 chairs away between Marcus and Mason's partner, Harold. She had watched the entire performance with her hands folded in her lap, not touching her pie or her wine. Now she stood and reached into her jacket. "Before Rachel leaves," she said evenly, "I have something for Mason." She removed a small brown envelope and held it across the table. Mason looked at it, then at her, then at me. "What is this?" he asked. "Open it," Sophie said. He hesitated. He was a man used to handing things to others, not receiving them. For a moment, he studied the envelope as if it might bite him. Then Gloria said quietly, "Mason?" He picked it up and opened it. I watched his face closely. I had seen the contents 11 days earlier when Sophie arrived at my apartment at 9 in the evening, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and placed a stack of papers between us. "I need you to read these," she had said, "and I need you to be brave." The first document was a medical record from a urology clinic in Evanston dated 4 years earlier, before Daniel and I had even met. It documented an elective bilateral vasectomy performed on a 31-year-old patient. The name printed in black ink was Daniel's. He had never told me. Not while we were dating, not when we became engaged, not during 2 years when his family treated my body like defective equipment for failing to produce a child on their schedule. He had made a permanent personal decision to never have children, and then stood by silently while his father blamed me for something his own son had made impossible. The second document inside Sophie's envelope was a positive pregnancy test, mine, with a date from 11 days earlier. It had been confirmed by my doctor with blood work and an ultrasound image showing something very small and very real, a heartbeat I had watched on a monitor while tears ran down my face, Sophie holding one hand and my mother holding the other. I was 8 weeks pregnant. As Sophie had explained in her calm paralegal voice, the math was simple. Daniel's vasectomy had a failure rate of less than 1%, and yet here we were. "It happens," my doctor had said, surprised. "Rarely, but it does. The procedure may have partially reversed over time. It's documented in medical literature." I hadn't cared about the literature. I cared about the heartbeat. Now Mason read both documents. Then he read them again. I watched the color drain from his face slowly at first and then all at once. Finally, he looked at Daniel. "Is this?" he began. "It's real," Sophie said. "Both of them. The medical record is certified, and the pregnancy is confirmed by her OB with blood work dated 11 days ago." The room had moved past silence and settled into something else entirely. The cousins, the business partners, the family friends, Vanessa standing beside Gloria's pearls against the wall, no one moved. "Daniel," Gloria said. Her voice sounded different from anything I had heard from her before, stripped down and tense. Daniel was staring at the tablecloth. His jaw was tight. "You had a vasectomy," I said. Not as a question, simply as a fact. He didn't answer. 4 years ago," I continued, "before we met, and you never told me." Still nothing. "You sat at this table," I said, "and let your father slide divorce papers to me because I failed to provide an heir. And you knew. You knew the entire time." Something crossed his face. I'm not sure what to call it. Not exactly guilt, though perhaps close to it. More like the expression of someone who had avoided thinking about something for a long time and was suddenly forced to confront it all at once. Rachel, he said. Don't, I replied. I turned back to Mason. He was still holding the papers, and his hands had developed a faint tremor he didn't seem to notice. For 2 years, I said, you treated me as if I were the problem. You sent your wife's articles about fertility diets to my email. You made comments at dinner about decisions, timelines, and legacy. You invited me into your study after our first anniversary and explained that the Hargrove family had expectations and that I should understand what was at stake. I paused. You brought another woman to Thanksgiving dinner and had her wear your wife's jewelry. Mason opened his mouth. And your son, I continued, never told any of you the truth. Not once. Because it was easier to let everyone believe the problem was me. The room held its breath. I'm going to have this baby, I said. My baby. Mine. Not the Hargroves. Not anyone's legacy. My child will spend weekends with his grandmother Linda in Indianapolis and celebrate every birthday with his Aunt Sophie, and he will understand exactly what kind of people his father's family are, which is why they will not be part of his life. Vanessa spoke quietly. I didn't know about any of this. I looked at her. She stood very still. The expression on her face was not what I expected. She looked less defensive and more like someone who had just realized she had entered a situation under false assumptions and was unsure how to step away. I know, I said. I can see that. I picked up my purse. I caught Sophie's eyes across the table, and she nodded once, barely noticeable. It was the nod of someone who had been your friend for 12 years, who had driven to your apartment at 9 in the evening with a stack of documents, who had held your hand during an ultrasound, and who had sat through an entire Thanksgiving dinner like a quiet fuse waiting for the right moment. I felt such appreciation for her in that moment that I nearly said it out loud. The signed papers are in front of you, I told Mason. I assume your lawyers can handle the rest. My attorney will contact yours on Monday. I walked out of the dining room, down the wood-paneled hallway, past the coat check attendant and his soft jazz radio, and out through the heavy doors into the cold November air. I sat on the stone steps and breathed. 2 minutes later, the door opened again. Sophie came out, sat beside me, and handed me my coat, which she had collected from the coat check. She put her arm around my shoulders. You okay? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. That's the honest answer. What's happening inside? A lot, she said. Gloria is crying. Mason is quietly yelling at Daniel, which somehow sounds worse than regular yelling. Vanessa left through the side door. Harold is still eating his pie because Harold is a practical man. I laughed, which surprised me. The laugh came from somewhere beneath the exhaustion, the grief, and the strange light feeling that comes after finally saying what needed to be said. He's going to challenge the divorce terms, I said. Let him, Sophie replied. The house is in your name equally. You have 2 years of documented fertility pressure that I can easily turn into a civil harassment claim if necessary. And you're carrying the only Hargrove grandchild that exists, which their own lawyers will eventually explain has certain legal and reputational implications. Cooperation will look better for them. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since the second time Gloria sent you a fertility article, she said, I've been prepared for 8 months. I leaned my head against her shoulder. Above us, the sky was clear and very cold, and the parking lot lights made small golden circles on the pavement. I'm scared, I said. I know. About the baby, about raising him alone, about everything. You're not alone, Sophie said. You have me. You have your mom, and you have your grandmother's earrings, which, for the record, look far better on you than the pair Gloria gave away tonight. I touched my pearls. They really do, she added. The divorce was finalized 5 months later. The house remained mine. The settlement ended up being fair, largely because Mason Hargrove cared deeply about appearances, and a contested divorce involving documented spousal pressure, and a vasectomy he hadn't known about, would have reflected badly. Daniel's lawyers contacted Sophie's firm after 3 weeks and said their client intended to cooperate. My mother moved up from Indianapolis. She took the second bedroom and insisted on paying a small rent that I told her wasn't necessary. She paid it anyway, because she is Linda Chambers, and that is simply how she operates. My son was born on a Tuesday in late June, weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, with his grandfather's dark hair and, according to my mother, my grandmother's mouth. I named him James, after no one in particular, because I wanted him to begin his life without carrying anyone else's expectations. Sophie was in the delivery room. My mother was there too. They spent much of the time arguing about whether the television in the corner should be on or off, and I loved them both enough that it didn't matter. Later, I heard through Marcus, who eventually stopped seeing Daniel's cousin but remained in contact with me, that Vanessa had left by December. Mason experienced some professional embarrassment related to a collapsed business deal. Marcus said it was unrelated to everything else. Although it happened around the same time, several of Mason's longtime associates stopped returning his calls. Gloria had started seeing a therapist on Tuesdays, something Marcus mentioned casually, but which stayed in my mind in a strangely neutral way, as if perhaps some things were beginning to shift. Daniel, I was told, moved to Seattle. I didn't ask for details. I thought about him occasionally, the way you think about a chapter of life that taught you something difficult but necessary. Not with much anger. Anger takes a lot of space, and I had a baby who needed most of mine. When I did think about it, I believe Daniel Hargrove had been shaped so strongly by his father's voice that he never fully developed his own. He made a private decision 4 years before I met him, and then lacked the courage to speak it. In trying to avoid his father's disappointment, he allowed me to become the focus of it instead. And in the end, he lost, not because of the divorce, but because he would never know his son. James didn't know any of this yet. He was 7 months old and deeply interested in ceiling fans and his grandmother's reading glasses. He laughed when Sophie made a certain face and fell asleep in the car within minutes of merging onto any highway. From the beginning, he seemed entirely himself, calm, observant, and completely uninterested in the idea of legacy. One Sunday afternoon in February, I sat on the living room floor stacking soft blocks with him, blocks he immediately knocked over and studied carefully. My mother came in from the kitchen, sat on the couch behind me and said, "You know what you did at that dinner?" "What?" "You didn't leave before you signed. You read every page, signed everything, and then said what needed to be said. Most people would have either walked out immediately or caused a scene." She paused. "You handled it properly." I thought about that. James pulled a block toward him and tried to put it in his mouth. "I was terrified," I said. "I know," my mother replied. "That's why it mattered." James looked up at me with wide, steady eyes, as if he also considered that a reasonable conclusion. I gently took the block from his mouth and handed him a green one instead. He studied it for a moment and accepted it. Outside the window, Chicago in February was gray and cold and completely indifferent. But the apartment was warm. Something on the stove smelled like the soup my mother made every Sunday without being asked. Somewhere across town, Sophie was probably on the phone giving someone calm, detailed advice about their legal options. And I thought, this is the life I'm building. Brick by careful brick. Not on a foundation someone else created for me, but on ground I chose myself. Even when that ground shook, it was enough. In truth, it was more than enough.